So, unit testing DITA-OT plugin extensions. Those of you who managed to go through the wins in Berlin last year might recognise the format of my slide deck. It is a slightly different shade of teal to last year because I have now changed to working for a different company. So we'll move on to the second one, which is again stolen from my previous slide, saying that I'm free to talk. This is all my own views, so I won't get into trouble with anyone, so I can make it more amusing and what have you. So, very briefly, there's got to be a bragging slide for your employer, isn't there? So, what is the FIWARE Foundation? FIWARE Foundation is an open standard. I assume you all understand what an open standard is, because DITA is one of them, where there are a series of large engineering concerns like Telefonica, NEC, Engineering Italy, what have you, who are writing stuff for Internet of Things. And on top of that, FIWARE, is an open standard to try and unify this so that no individual company has got a proprietary hold over stuff. For those of you who are more interested in this sort of thing, I am actually giving another lecture, an entire hour on this, and I've only got 20 minutes or whatever it is for this one, in Malaga in 3 weeks' time. That's the FIWARE Summits bit thing, and you can see we do the various other bits and pieces. So that's enough of the bragging for the company. What does this mean for me? Well, this is my GitHub repository. You can probably see something happened in April. I started working with my new employer. My new employer is very open source friendly. You'll also notice there are about 3 or 4 dots in the middle of January. That was me fixing the stuff which I was presenting last year, which didn't work with DITA-OT 3. I don't know about the rest of you, but I find that there's some guy in Finland who keeps breaking my code. Every single time there's an upgrade, I find a new and more exciting way to try and find out what I've been doing wrong. This is coming from the past experience. Is that what you really need if you are going to upgrade from 185 to 2 what have you to what have you? But what Mr. Anderson was saying earlier, who's still on 185? You're stuck on 185 because you have a fear of upgrading, right? I have a method here of trying to mean that I've got a bit more confidence in my upgrading, and therefore the upgrade cycle has become more and more painless each time. And it's quite simple. Oh, this is another thing. Last year, I noticed that virtually every slide deck had a series of pictures of small furry animals. So we'll move on to the next slide. I start putting in my small furry animals. The reason you need to have unit testing is quite simple. It validates to show that it does what it wants, and it checks you haven't broken anything. Now, the refactoring bit, as far as I'm concerned, is whenever there is a release, like this morning, I have no idea if I have inadvertently been doing some dependency on that release. If anyone had been using the spell checker and the linter I presented last year, it had a hard dependency on a specific version of the Saxon Java jar, which has been upgraded to the latest version as of 3.1. I can see someone nodding in the background there. And you broke my code. And it took me some time to work out how to unbreak my code. But again, it's no one's fault. If you've got unit tests, and you've got unit tests working on your CI environment, and it will continue to work it out, you want things to fail on a regular basis, because this is showing where things will be going wrong. Now, the other half of this slide, the reason why the cat is grumpy, is that writing tests is difficult. There is a distinct lack of support tools, and if you're not careful, you end up spending more time debugging the damn tests than the actual code. So that's what I'm going to try and fix later today. So let's move on to some happier animals. Happier animals. In addition to the other stuff, last year I presented a couple of plugins which were nothing to do with creating content. They were ancillary functions which you would use on top of this. These are standard testing tools. And again, code coverage is a standard testing tool, and profiling, working out whether things are going according to plan or not, is a standard testing tool to work out what you're doing. What FIWARE is currently doing is it's an open source initiative where I'm trying to corral various other companies to follow best practice. So, hey, this is an open source initiative. Could you please do best practice? Let's see if we can start using this sort of thing. So, moving on, we will try. Last time, if you remember, I couldn't get my screen up on the big screen, so I'm going to make sure it goes on the big screen this time to see if this actually works for the demo. So let's pause this here. How do I pause this? Oops. Escape. That'll do. All disappeared. So, demo, unit testing. Let's use that one. So, it's a plugin called Unit Test. I'm going to output it somewhere else, and I'm going to run it or get to my sample files. What actually happens? Not very much. You get all the random stuff. This is doing under V rather than under the D debug. And wait for a second. Talk amongst yourselves wasn't working. As you can see, I'm trying to get more cats into my presentation just to show that something's happening. I've put a pre-processing steps to display a plugin with various cats on it. This is also available for download. If you had a look, if you had a look at the previous slide which I've managed to get rid of, actually says where my GitHub repository is. But frankly, you don't need to know that anymore because I'm going to put a PR request onto the repository in the very near future, and you'll be able to find this anyway. So as you can see each time it's running, what it's doing is it's running either an HTML transform or a PDF transform, and then there is an output, and the output is checking that the output file is the same as the input file, as you would expect. This is the standard way you would write a unit test. You have your setup, you have your whatever you're trying to test, and then you have your expectation at the far end. Don't worry, it won't take much longer. There's only 10 tests. Nearly done. You can see it's if we could get rid of that cat, you can see that it said done the first 5 tests. It said what's happening. It's just doing the second set of 5 tests. Come on, last test. I'm sure it was quicker when I was running on my own beforehand. Go away. There we go. Yeah, so you can see the previous set of tests, what the test expectation was, and whether it's succeeded. The very first at the top, I have deliberately disabled a test suite, so that you don't have to run the entire test. You can also run individual tests, and you can see the actual results on the test when you're running verbose. Now, speed this up a little bit. It can't be much longer. Come on. I know they're quite sweet, aren't they? They are. I have another demo bit which will actually demonstrate the use of the cat thing as well, but this is taking longer than I expected. Come on. Yeah. It must be the network. What this is actually doing is it's pre-processing and doing a single GET request on your preprocessor, which in itself, okay, it's a bit of fun for this demo, but you could actually use it for spyware. You could actually get it to, there we go. You see, one of my tests has failed, and it's come up with nice red text. You would get 3 files coming in the output, and it would look something like this. Now, if anyone has ever used N unit, J unit, what have you. There is actually something called ant unit, which this is running. It's running a series of ant tasks afterwards to see what's actually happened. You can see which stuff you've done, and if you scroll down a bit, it actually tells you what's gone wrong. What I've done is I've added in an extra unexpected line, saying this unexpected line is an error, and it says this is the error compared with your initial bits and pieces. Now, rather than run that thing all over again, I'll just give the results for the next bit. All right. This is another set of tests. This is validated from what I did beforehand. But perhaps more useful is to work out what code coverage you've got on your XSL files. As you can see, I've got about 70% code coverage. I'm good at this stuff, and then I'm not covering checking within a code block. I'm not covering the spelling check, or the spelling rules, and so on and so forth. And I'm not doing anything on correction. And right at the bottom, this is the ANT target. So you can see that I'm not actually running any, on my unit test, anything against my autocorrection here whatsoever. It's not running the autocorrect target at all. So you can see which bits of my code have been covered and which bits of my code haven't been covered by my tests. So I've got some level of, you can see a number of times it's been done as well. I've got some level of confidence as to what areas of stuff I have covered. So, enough of the demos. There's another bit which I won't go into right now. Let's get back to this. Let me go on the slide. So that was unit test report and code coverage, was those two. The other thing which you can do, there's an existing ANT task called ANTRO, which will tell you how long various steps in your plugin will take place. This, the stuff up the top there is actually my little cat's thing, and you can see that the majority of time it's taking is still on the FOP processing of a completely pointless PDF, but there is actually doing a GET request at some point as well. So, moving on. What does it do? There are various different layers to this. The first layer is, of course, you have a DITA-OT transform, and that actually sets up another file which is effectively a fixture for all your tests, which I'll describe how the tests work out. It then runs ant unit to try and explain, okay, run against that set of files over there. This generated file then runs in turn another ant instance of each test itself. The tests themselves then actually call DITA-OT and then check the result against what you've got. So what you've got within the target itself is that standard build in it, make sure that you've got the thing up and running. Unit test in it is going to be sanity checking, make sure you've got the right parameters, make sure you've got you're not doing something stupid. Generate fixtures is the first clever bit where you start creating the test itself. Unit test, we're starting to do the iteration around stuff. This is why I am using the ant contrib library, which is not a terribly clever thing to do for ant if you know how to use ant properly. However, I also am able to try and mitigate this, is that all of the libraries I have in, I am including at runtime rather than including as part of the standard DITA-OT plugin. So I've not put it in my plugin XML saying include this library. I'm deliberately doing this at runtime. So you can consider all of my libraries are effectively development dependencies rather than proper dependencies. This is important because ant unit itself overrides the fail task. So if you don't do this, then it means that absolutely everything in DITA-OT won't work if you put this plugin in. So that's why I had to change it to go the right way around. So what we have is actually an iteration across a series of files, which looks a bit like this, where you have within each test suite, which normally would be a plugin, you have a folder called test, and then you have at least, you definitely have a bootstrap file if you want to be able to run your tests individually locally, which is pointing to where my library stuff is. You can possibly have a coverage file which is generated as, when we do test coverage, we'll get into that one later. There's also another special file you can have called test.properties, which means if you have to set various command line properties, you can do it in a test file. All this is documented in my GitHub repository, so you can have a look at that later. There's one test to each directory. It's very annoying, but I started doing this because I had a bet. One of my colleagues at work said, you can't test DITA-OT plugins. So I said, challenge accepted. And because it's one test to a directory, you can have a build XML in each one. It's going to be called build XML using the standard name, and then it will have the necessary bits and pieces thereafter. So let's have a look at what a test looks like. A test consists of a build XML, which is standard Ant, and as you can see, it's about 3 lines of Ant. And if you put in a description, that will be used within the output report. So this one displays body text in a standard font. And it's just a target called unit test with 3 library functions, which again I'll come into later. And all it is a bit of data, document data map, data files, and an expectation file, which at the moment can either be HTML or an FO file, which is for your PDFs. I've also done it for the plugins I did beforehand, which was SVRL output. You can also randomly test something based on the outputs it's putting to screen. Just look at the text, like the cats file doesn't actually have a proper output, so you have to check, has it run? And then all the test in that case is has it run, has it executed to completion. You could quite easily add in additional Ant if you wanted to. So if you're, there's this thing called HTML article, which is one of my library files, which will get the last article out of a document. If you need to do post-processing like regex post-processing to remove dates or timestamps or what have you, you can write Ant. I prefer not to. I'll try to make it simple. So let's make it simple. Simplifying the unit tests. I'll start from the bottom because that's what I was just talking about. Resource simplifies the input. There are, within resource, there's an Ant lib which has got a series of useful tasks. So every single test can just be 3 or 4 lines of standard boilerplate. So, you know, exec this HTML5, get the HTML article out of it, and then compare that the text actually is what you expect. Job done, right? The other bit at the top, of the config stuff, this is all following the standard format here, is actually doing things like ignoring stuff. My plugin I'm using without any customizations on fonts or what have you. So if you start customizing your fonts, you're going to end up having a different PDF FO than if you're just using the standard fonts. So it will replace your string of fonts with just the words, monospace. So you can check that you're using the right monospace font, or you can give it whatever title you want. Colors, again, is similar in that I don't read hexadecimal natively. I doubt you do either. So therefore, it will replace the hexadecimal with a reasonable name based in English. So you can see, yes, this is going to be in blue rather than it's going to be in 00FF00. RGB, no, 0000FF. See, I told you it's not native. And what was the other? Attributes. Attributes gets rid of various bits of fluff from my expectation. If you ever look at the topic FO, which comes out from your PDF, but the generation of your PDF, it's got a lot of repetitive attributes which are useful in placing stuff on screen, but is not what I'm interested in. So this file will just say, just delete those before I start doing my checking, so it will make sure that it's easy to understand. Right, so writing your own unit test. There are sample, very simple DITA files on how to do this, based on a code block, based on a paragraph, based on a list, blah, blah, blah. You can probably get better ones from Mr. Anderson's repo from this morning, but these are very simple. You just copy one over. If you're just worrying about having a header, fine, okay, you just copy over a paragraph, fine, that'll do, no problem. You then can Volkswagen your tests. There's a particular parameter you can put in called test copy, which will recognize that the tests are running and replace the results with the actual results which you've created. So if you've got some sort of automatic pass, it's great. This is very, very useful so that when, for example, the HTML5 base plugin started doing more accessibility attributes in it, every single one of my tests would fail because they've now got additional attributes in there. So you can check, oh, it's failing, but it's failing for a good reason. Fine, just regenerate the whole damn lot and we're good to go. If you have a problem, and provided you put bootstrap XML in the right place, you can run each test individually and you'll get more verbose output. So you can see where it's breaking. This is how I worked out that Jarno had broken my plugin beforehand, because it was saying what it is actually. I blame Jarno. Actually, I blame Michael K, because in the version of the Saxon jar that was in 2x, I think it was, you could get line numbers for free, and then he's taken that out for the next one, saying you need to pay for it. So in order to run my stuff, I need to do a fork, Java fork, to instantiate myself later on. So I can actually go forward and do this. So I'm going to move on really rather quickly because he's pointing 5 minutes. Code coverage. Code coverage is, again, something which we haven't really got. So what it does here is you instrument your XSL. So I will overwrite all your XSLs in your plugin, and it will add an additional XSL message on the decision point, and it stores another file which is saying where all the nodes are and what line number it is, using this old version, what have you. So I have a coverage XML file which is the basis of a Coveralls style report. So what this means is that we can instrument, run the test, and part of the report generation will also report a coverage report. What this means is, because I've got sufficiently close to what Coveralls will do, is that we can quite nicely integrate with CI and coverage like Coveralls, so that what you can actually see, if you go to my GitHub, which I haven't got down here beforehand, you can see I've got these lovely little badges saying coverage 70% or what have you, which is apparently not very good, but better than what most of you have done for your XML, your plugins, I should think. And you can track the coverage online. Okay, so moving on. Profiling. Profiling is an existing transform. So it's an existing Java jar, which I've just put a simple wrap around because it's not terribly useful, but if you have a particularly slow ant task, then you can actually find out what's going on, and you can just run it again using the Java jar. So let's wrap this up. Grumpy Cat comes back again. If you want to say that you like this sort of thing, you can go down to my GitHub repository, which was back on, I'll just put it back here. Where are we? GitHub repository. Yeah, there we go. That's my GitHub repository down there, which has got the thing in there. So I encourage everybody to click like and subscribe. And you also get the Twitter handle for FIWARE, where you can say that you think that the technical support staff from FIWARE are really rather nice and give you all sorts of free tools for Santa Claus coming up in 1 month's time. So I can now go straight back to the end. I should have mentioned that earlier. That'll do. Right, all done.
Thank you.
Trying to get it in quick time.
So if you have any questions?
Yeah, yes. Go ahead. No, it's been. I've seen it done in the press beforehand. There was actually an additional plugin you could put onto Jenkins, I think it was, which no matter what the code base you had, would be able to put a green for all your tests. It's just too useful a tool to get rid of. Yeah. Next.
This sounds like a really good idea. And I think you've put a lot of effort into this. I think if anyone in the audience is really keen on implementing something like this, and you just can't figure out what to test, there's an open source project I know of that would probably appreciate someone implementing more of this. So talk to Jason, talk to your friendly neighborhood open source project. We need people to contribute things, and testing is one thing we'd like to get better at. So.
Okay.
There's one other point I can say is if you look at my repositories, I've even randomly grabbed one of the Oxygen XML plugins. And I've got the code coverage working on that simply by just taking a few simple tests. The thing which you need to remember if you're trying to get code coverage on Coveralls is that the structure of the repository needs to be simple to be able to download it. Downloaded. I've done it so that you can just download it using the standard zip, and then within that you need to have a folder called test, which is where your tests are, and you must invoke Coveralls coverage from root. There is a Travis XML, because of course it integrates with Travis as well as Coveralls, which will download that. And at the moment, there's an open bug on that, which means that it will only work with Java 8. So it won't be able to work with Java 9, Java 10, until they've done the pull request, so I can upload the test. So at the moment, if you want to do integrated test coverage, it has to be Java 8.
Thank you.